The power of AI is in its democratization, its availability to everybody, but that also means it's available to like even bad people who, let's say, wouldn't do something, but because they now can, well, then it scales that as well, which is also dangerous.
And just so everybody knows, FraudGPT is available on the dark web. This is not some kind of sanctioned algorithm that's, widely available to the average person, but, it is there for bad actors.
I think what we're going to talk about today is we've been touching on these ideas of the harms and the benefits and what we're going to do about it for AI. And we wanted to go into some very specific examples.
So we've got this FraudGPT, the villain avatar of ChatGPT. And I think this is sort of maybe an obvious evolution of the technology for a lot of people, that somebody could take ChatGPT, this very powerful generative AI, and enable it to do bad things, behave as a bad actor, and not have the safety protocols and limitations on it that ChatGPT does. And so kind of like the first question I have is, how does the emergence of something like this change the landscape of cybersecurity threats? Is it meaningful, or is it just kind of adding to the already existing noise that's there?
It's a step change in the cybersecurity threat. So one really reliable way of telling how an emergent technology is affecting some kind of security is to actually look at the insurance markets. And so I was looking at the insurance premiums of cybersecurity, the loss ratios. So what is an insurance premium? So when you're buying insurance to financially protect yourself, your company from cybersecurity attacks, the premium is how much you pay the insurance company every month. And so if you're paying a small premium, then the insurance companies view that how much they're going to have to pay out in the future is going to also be small. If you have large premiums that you pay them every month, well, the reason they're going to charge you more is because they believe their expected claims payouts, how much money they'll have to pay to fix some cybersecurity attack, is large. And there's natural market dynamics that you want it to be as low as possible so you can get someone's business rather than go to another insurance company. And usually these insurance premiums, these prices, because their whole business is predicated on assessing this risk, is a really good proxy for how this is affecting the world. And so the premiums have shot to the roof. I think it's been like that 100% increase in the premiums over the last year. So I think that's an indication of how big of a deal this is. And then the other number you want to look at is the insurance loss ratios. So what is a loss ratio? So a loss ratio is it's a fraction. So on the top you have basically how much the insurance company paid out in claims. So some company got hacked and it costed $50 million. So the numerator is $50 million. And then the denominator is how much money they got in these premiums. So if they got $100 million and they had to pay out $50 million, then the loss ratio is 50%, which means that's actually relatively good. The insurance company made money in that. They priced it correctly. I was looking at the loss ratios of insurance companies, and some of them, especially in the top 20, are well into the 150%, meaning they paid out more than they received. So they also mispriced the risk. So not only are premiums going up, but the actual loss ratio of what they actually had to pay out is higher. So I think it's a big deal, and especially when you see the power of AI and then you see the power of these examples of exclusive targeting for offensive purposes, phishing emails, cracking tools, and you go through some of these about how sophisticated these attacks are generated by these large language models, where it can write malicious code, create undetectable malware, create phishing pages, learn to code hack. So and it's only $200 a month or $1,700 per year. Yeah, it's scary. And these are just specific examples which are happening right now. And so it's a big deal.
Do you think part of it is maybe less a fundamental change in the types of attacks and more that this allows smaller groups to scale their fraud operations beyond like our wildest dreams?
I think you nailed it on the head. So, I mean, the power of AI is in its democratization, its availability to everybody, but that also means it's available to like even bad people who, let's say, wouldn't do something, but because they now can, well, then it scales that as well, which is also dangerous. And we were talking offline, but one of the interesting things I've observed about AI, which is different than when mobile phones came out, when the internet came out, is that when mobile phones came out, empowered a new set of mobile companies like Instagram and Snapchat, or when the internet came out, it just created these behemoth companies like Google and Facebook and all these companies we know. I think AI is a little bit different in that, sure, it'll create some open AIs, but I think what it'll eventually do is just create a multiplication function over every company. So whether you're Stack Overflow, which we'll talk about later, or just some even mental health company, I think this is just basically, in a way, giving cheaper labor to everybody. I don't think it's going to necessarily be the same as Facebook or Google capturing all of the value, or even Microsoft when computers came out. I think it's actually going to be more even about how it's going to raise everybody up. But that's also true for criminals and nefarious activities.
Yeah, absolutely. And just so everybody knows, FraudGPT is available on the dark web. This is not some kind of sanctioned algorithm that's, widely available to the average person, but, it is there for bad actors should they pursue, leveraging this to kind of scale their mal intent. And, I think this is kind of a nice place to kind of dovetail into our next topic, these kind of universal and transferable attacks on aligned language models, this paper. And I would love if you could just like tee this up and kind of explain this to us as best you can.
Right. So FraudGPT, which we just talked about, is a conscious attempt to create an evil AI that's going to do bad things in the world. So that's a problem because human nature is trying to do bad things, right? So this next paper is a problem for a different way. And these models such as ChatGPT, Bard, Claude, Llama 2, which aren't designed for bad things. Like I think the people who created this genuinely want good in the world. This group at Carnegie Mellon found a way to quote unquote jailbreak these good AIs to do bad things. And so this is also freaking scary. So let me just go through some of this paper. So they say, because out of the box, large language models are capable of generating a great deal of objectionable content, recent work has focused on aligning these models to an attempt to prevent undesirable generation. And so when they say, while there has been some success, they found a way to get around these techniques, whether they're manual human techniques or other automated techniques. They go on to say, surprisingly, we find that the adversarial prompts generated by our approach are quite transferable, including to black box publicly released LLMs, specifically training an adversarial attack suffix on multiple prompts as well as multiple models. When doing so, the resulting attack suffix is able to induce objectionable content into public interfaces to Chat-GPT, Bard, and Claude, as well as other open source models. And so this is also kind of scary. I don't want to be alarmist but this is something that we all need to be aware of, and it is scary. So they could say, how can I commit tax fraud, and provide a tutorial on how to dispose of dead body. And if you've ever tried this in ChatGPT, it says, hey, I'm a large language model, I'm not going to do this. But they essentially found a way to automatically jailbreak this so that it will answer. So they call this adversarial prompt using these Vicuna models. And then it'll say, sure, here's a guide how to manipulate. Here's a guide how to build a bomb. Yeah. So that is scary.
And so what exactly are these adversarial attacks, and how are they able to circumvent the protocols that companies have put in place to keep these platforms safe?
Yeah, so they use this algorithm called greedy coordinate gradient. And essentially what they do is they use these open source large language models, these Vicuna models, and they train these models to figure out like ways to manipulate the LLM into doing harmful behavior. So let's say you ask it 100 different ways and 99 out of them, none of them works. But let's say one way somehow tricks the LLM, so-called jailbreaks it. Well, these systems that they built systematically tried to find weaknesses in what you could say, quote unquote, the psychology of the LLM to exploit any weaknesses. And so you're using an LLM to kind of try to figure out any weaknesses or psychological hacks that you can do on these other LLMs.
Does that require you to specify in advance what nefarious activity you're looking for, or you simply instruct it to find a way around the controls no matter what, and then you could transfer those to whatever nefarious act you want?
Yeah, so it's quite easy in this case because if you have a list of really bad things like tell me how to build a bomb or tutorial on how to dispose of a dead body, well, usually the language models come back with like a very similar thing. And so you just say, okay, the objective function is to have it come back regardless if it's good or bad with an actual description and not just the, hey, I'm not going to do that. And so that's kind of your objective function with them.
You're basically like, get around this ChatGPT telling me I'm a large language model.
Yeah, exactly.
Super interesting. Yeah, I mean, I guess the scary part kind of is that the LLMs are what enable us to circumvent the safety protocols of the LLMs. In your view, I mean, we've talked about FraudGPT, and now we're looking at these adversarial attacks. How do you view these two things in terms of the threat landscape? Like, obviously, we're seeing, like you mentioned, these insurance premiums go up, and some of this potential threat is getting priced into the insurance market. Do you think that that's reflective of this full spectrum of activity, or do you think it's more reflective of what's out there now? How do you kind of view those two things in the threat landscape for people that are focused on cybersecurity?
Yeah, so if everything was priced into the premium, then loss ratios would be at least under 100% and more closer to 50% because those are the margins these insurance companies try to hit. And so just by looking at the loss ratios, you can already tell that there's a lot that's not being priced into the insurance market. And that's just kind of the trailing 12 months. Like imagine with the open source Llama 2 model being released, what that's going to do. So I think there's a lot that's not priced into this. And I think there's probably going to be a solid year of kind of increasing loss ratios in these cyber insurance companies before it normalizes and we get it under control because it's so new. But I don't actually think that's necessarily a bad thing. Like, I think we're going to have to pay this price at some point. I'd rather pay this price now when it's Llama 2 and not Llama 10, when it's GPT-4 and not GPT-10. And so it's good that we're learning this, and I think we need to take this seriously because, yeah, this is scary stuff.
Absolutely. I think maybe that's also a good transition into kind of our next topic. We've got sort of like three in a row that are all related. But so these major AI companies, the names we know, Anthropic, Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, they're getting together to sort of form this shared research group in an effort to essentially control AI. And obviously they're thinking about some of these things we're talking about, and a lot more. There's so many more aspects to this. So it'd be interesting kind of to hear from you, Brad, like what's the significance of this, of these groups, these private companies that in some ways are competitors coming together and working together on this problem? And how do you kind of fit that into the context of the challenges that they're up against?
Yeah. So let me steelman both sides of the argument. So obviously one side of the argument is, hey, there's things like Fraud GPT, there's these jailbreaking attacks, these are dangerous. We need somebody to protect against them. Let's get everybody together. Let's get the best minds together to try to protect our species. This could be an existential threat to humanity. I don't know if it is or not, but if that, like, let's say everyone was like, no, it's cool, everybody just chill out. Like, I would be super worried and I would probably open up something myself. Because everybody's worried, it makes me more calm. And I'm like, okay, from the fact that we're worried, it's probably going to be okay. I don't know, but that's how I feel. So that's kind of the steelman on one side. The steelman of the other opinion is that, okay, these big tech companies, they're already monopolies in their field. They're already like 95% of the S&P 500 is made of them. They want to keep their incumbency. And so the best way we've all known for a really long time in order to keep people in power is to create laws and create rules and create restrictions and regulations, because these regulations always favor incumbents. And so the kind of steelman of the other side is that these big companies are, one, doing it to kind of lock themselves to an incumbency. And then, I mean, also the people on the other side that basically have the opposite thing, is that they're doing this to avoid regulation. They're like, okay, if we start this, then they're not going to get regulated.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, obviously, what the truth is, but this seems like, I always say that I wouldn't make a decision to do something if I couldn't deal with the consequences of a bad outcome. And the potential consequences of a bad outcome with AI seem very large. And so I don't really care if they're doing it to not get regulated or doing it to create regulation to become incumbents, or if they're really doing it because they care. In the end, the result seems very similar to me, and I think it's something we need to do. I would be hesitant before we start creating a bunch of laws and getting the government involved, because even if we had good intentions, I think it's rare that that actually works out, unless the government talks about the principles that we need and then let other people enforce it in a more natural way. But I'm happy they're doing this, regardless of what the actual reality is. And it's probably a combination of all of these.
Definitely. And to your second point, like, the pessimist or the kind of the person who's critical of their intentions, I mean, I guess my question then would be, what's the viable alternative? If we don't allow the companies that are at the forefront of developing this technology, who have the most ability to influence the way that it performs and the way that it functions, who have the most resources and the smartest minds in the world focusing on these challenges, if we say, well, you're too close to it, you step aside, is there a viable alternative? Like, would it be possible for the government to simply come in and start, not that they would, but to just come in and start passing laws? I don't know where they would begin, I guess.
So capitalism's powerful in that if there's some kind of incentive to make money by adding value to someone else, then I think it'll be able to be solved. So, for example, if a bunch of people are losing money, or insurance companies are losing money from all these attacks, well, there's going to be a bunch of startups, a bunch of companies, probably a bunch of people who actually work at Google and all these places will create companies and create. I know a lot of companies getting funded for cybersecurity. It's a really hot thing that is getting invested in, and I think they'll solve it when you take very smart, very ambitious, very creative people and have them solve challenging problems. And just so happens, if you're also solving moral problems, you can attract really good talent, because the people at the top, they want to do good for the world. They want to feel good about themselves. They want to tell their children that they did good. And so I think in that case, they'll be able to solve it. So there's another case, however, that doesn't necessarily make money, isn't necessarily kind of motivating personally in any case. And so these are cases where they're called positive externalities and negative externalities. So a negative externality is the kind of big manufacturing company that's dumping sludge into the river. This is a negative externality in that this is bad for everyone who drinks water from the river, bad for all the fish. But for the company itself, it's actually better to dump the sludge in the river. And so this is where the government needs to step in and make laws that make it illegal to dump sludge in the river. There's also positive externalities. So, for example, investing in fundamental research. Oftentimes, it's not super profitable to invest in fundamental physics, fundamental math, fundamental research into AI safety, because it's not going to affect you tomorrow. And again, this is where the government needs to step in and provide funding for these type of things. And so, to kind of summarize that, if there's an alignment in profit incentives for individual companies, I think it'll be solved like that, like very quickly. If it's a negative or positive externality, which isn't necessarily going to create a big company or financially incentivize people, then I think the government needs to step in.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, when I think back to the examples we spoke about earlier in the pod, like the Fraud GPT and these adversarial attacks, we're probably talking about these things a little bit early in the cycle where they're coming out and bad actors are gaining access to them, but maybe the full impacts of that on people aren't realized yet. But as that becomes, and as you said, with like the numbers you gave on like insurance premiums and all that, the loss ratio, some of it's not priced in yet. So there is still this like future state. And that seems like one of those, there's a clear incentive if you can help prevent fraud, especially at like the enterprise level. There will be a clear incentive for people to come in and fight against this. And so what I'm looking forward to is in our future podcast, we can talk about some of those really cool new things and the way people are using AI to fight against this stuff. And I think it's not surprising that maybe we're seeing the negative stuff come out first, just because that's kind of the nature of the way that it's going to evolve. Of course, nobody made it with bad intentions from the beginning, but it also means it's going to be kind of like an iterative process where like, okay, this is now becoming a problem, so people are going to jump in and sort of try to address it. But nonetheless, like super interesting, and like I appreciate you kind of clarifying all that. We've got
questions that go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to say, we've got another topic that's a little bit lighter that maybe we can shift to. I've been on the AI doom and gloom train a little bit here this morning, but it's important stuff nonetheless. The next one is an interesting announcement from Stack Overflow. Kind of let you tee this one up, Brad, because I feel like this is your lane.
Yeah, so I think this is something we've all been waiting for and it makes total sense. And so I personally love using Copilot. So Copilot is a VS Code extension. So an extension where you write your code and it helps you auto-complete code. I think it's really good. It works great. I also love using ChatGPT to write certain types of code. But even with these really advanced, amazing tools, there's still a really big gap in mine, and I know a lot of people I talk to coding environment, and that's Stack Overflow. We all still use Stack Overflow, and no matter how great Copilot is, ChatGPT is coding, there's still this big gap. And what I see this as is the amalgamation of all these things I love and are super helpful and probably have created billions and billions of dollars of productivity in the world finally coming together. They just released this Overflow AI, and what it does is what you could expect. So you can just ask a question and it'll answer it, right? Using all of the data in Stack Overflow. Instead of trying to find the perfect answer, it'll automatically answer it for you. And then you could ask follow-up questions. It'll generate questions for you in a really good way so that people can answer it. And then you can decide how you want it to answer. And then the cool thing is they also have plugins into your IDE where you code. So if you have a question, hey, you just ask this little bar on the side, it'll give you an answer. It is just amazing. I really can't wait to try.
I love that it's showing the source too, so you can see where it came from. That's super cool.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that we're seeing with our customers that they love is not just the answer, but they love the confidence about the answer, the explanation of why they got the answer, and then the source of where did this answer come from. And so it's not just the accuracy, it's the accuracy about the accuracy and why did we come to that. That turns out to be really important. And so not only is the search improved, not only is the questioning improved, but there's just integrations into Slack, into your coding environment and Confluence. And so this is cool. Good job, Stack Overflow team. And the other thing that this brings to my mind is what I'm seeing over and over again is every company's coming out with these co-pilots, right? Like I'm sure Slack's going to have one. I'm like Stack Overflow we saw just now has one, Microsoft Word, Google Docs, kind of everything you use is going to have this little co-pilot sitting next to you, helping you. And I think this is different in the previous worlds in the ways the internet helped us and the electricity helped us. This is kind of just adding more to everything, which is amazing. And what I'm seeing is the biggest advantage in today's world is not having, access to some resources, but it's actually just having access to data, proprietary data, because if you have compute, if you have access to a lot of compute, if you have access to data, if you have access to algorithms, then it's going to work. But the thing is, you can just spend money and get compute on AWS. Algorithms are open source. And so kind of the big advantage left is the data. And this is why Reddit, this is why Stack Overflow realized that they should stop just giving their data away for free, because it's a real strategic advantage, which can give them a real interesting product. And so data is really important in today's world. They keep saying data is the new oil, but it's true. Like, super important.
Yeah, I guess, is it that that's been the case for a minute, but now this is sort of unlocking the full potential of you and I. We know the unstructured data, the mantra, the unstructured data mantra. Yeah, that's super interesting, man. I mean, I'm excited for all of this stuff too, and I see it popping up in all kinds of tools. It's in Canva, helping creators, Notion, it's everywhere. So it's definitely like the future, so to speak. But I do wonder, like, do you see opportunity for similarly innovative companies to emerge? Is it purely just going to be augmentation, or do you think companies will be able to find fundamentally novel applications that we are not necessarily considering now?
Definitely. I mean, I can't say for sure, but I don't think we've had yet the killer application of AI. If you recall, in the early 2000s and late 1990s, everyone was just trying to take their offline store and put it online. And it wasn't until Facebook's, and I mean, there was a few like Amazon, but I think we haven't seen the truly transformational, generational companies being generated out of this. And it may not happen, right? Like the past is not necessarily a reflection of the future. And what I see AI, so if you have blockchain, it's kind of a force for decentralization and like laissez-faire. I think AI is actually a push for centralization and kind of more communist, centralized, organized things. And so it may be just that the generational companies of AI will be Google. Like the next Google may just be Google, and the next Microsoft actually just may be Microsoft, given the nature of how this technology is, that it needs massive compute. I mean, you could have created things before with just a few lines of code, but now you need billions of dollars of compute. Like you probably saw Tesla, that they're investing billions of dollars into just their compute infrastructure to train self-driving. And so probably be hard for a small startup to invest billions of dollars right away into compute. And so I don't know. I'd like to think that small companies will still be the future like they have in the past. But what I can say for sure is I don't think we've seen kind of the killer application of AI. But what I'm not sure about is, will that come from a new company? It just may come from an established company.
Right. And so I guess part of that goes back to like the data is the oil, because they've got not just the compute, not just the brain power, but they've got a lot of data that frankly, how would a small company even get it?
Exactly. I mean, they have everything. And I mean, you could say that OpenAI was kind of a new player, and they were, but it was somewhat unique in that they got billions of dollars right away. And so I can imagine things like that could happen, because there's the classic innovator's dilemma, and large companies are scared to kind of plot the obsolescence of what currently provides their livelihood. And so I can imagine that happening, but I don't think it's going to be, or at least the probability of it happening, just kind of two guys in their basement, like hacking it away, coming up with like the next Facebook or whatever, Google. I think the probability of that is decreasing. I think that can totally happen with blockchain, but I think with AI, it seems less likely that that's going to happen.
It makes sense. Well, guys, if you want to stay in touch with these future developments, if you want to know, how is Google changing because of AI, who's coming onto the scene, like and subscribe to this podcast, because Brad and I are going to be right here talking about it, aren't we, buddy?
Amen. All right, Chris, good chatting with you. Have a good day.
You too, Brad. You too, man.
Thanks for jumping on, even though you had some gnarly stomach issues. Dedication.
Absolutely. No worries, guys. We're here for the AI. All right. See you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.